Lake Okeechobee, the dirtiest lake in America.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started to discharge water from Lake Okeechobee into the St. Lucie River just this morning.
When Lake Okeechobee dropped, something rose from the depths, and experts are concerned. A black plume the color of strong coffee is spreading down 2 Florida coasts at once, visible from orbit, and the lab results just came back. Dead fish line the riverbanks, and the smell of decomposition is moving through waterfront neighborhoods. What rose from the bottom of Florida's biggest lake in December 2024 had been waiting there for 70 years, and now it is in the ocean.
You know why this matters. For years, those discharges out of Lake Okeechobee have poisoned our beaches, killed fish, and cost Florida millions in lost tourism.
What NOAA saw from orbit, December 2024. The South Florida Water Management District orders a routine drawdown. The lake is running high. The Army Corps of Engineers, which has managed the outflows since the 1930s, opens the gates. Lower the lake by a few inches over a few weeks. Standard operation. Nobody braces. 48 hours later, an analyst at NOAA pulls up the latest satellite pass and stops. 2 black plumes are blooming on the screen. One is moving east down the St. Lucie River toward the Atlantic. The other is moving west down the Caloosahatchee toward the Gulf. Both are dark enough to be picked up by Sentinel-2 and Landsat from orbit. Both are visibly spreading like ink.
A study calling Lake Okeechobee the dirtiest lake in the country is misleading.
The analyst calls a colleague over. They pull the previous week's imagery. The plumes are not there. They pull yesterday's imagery. The plumes are smaller, but already forming. By the time the call goes up the chain to the state environmental agencies, the discoloration has already passed the locks and is heading for the estuaries. When something goes wrong at Lake Okeechobee, it does not stay at Lake Okeechobee. It goes everywhere. Within a week, the black water reaches the coastal estuaries. Beach water turned the color of strong coffee. Fishing guides on the Treasure Coast wake up to mullet, snook, and baitfish floating belly up along the banks. One charter captain tells a local reporter he has worked the St. Lucie for 20 years and has never seen the river this color. He cancels the day's trips. By the end of the week, he cancels the season. Residents in waterfront neighborhoods start closing windows. The smell of decomposition is unmistakable. The sweet chemical rot of organic matter breaking down without oxygen. It rolls inland on the morning breeze and does not lift. Phone calls flood the regional health departments. People want to know if it is safe to let dogs near the water. The answer is no. State environmental crews start pulling samples. They expect elevated nutrients. That is normal during a release. What they pull from the plume is not normal. Phosphorus levels off the charts, higher than anything ever recorded during a release event. Dissolved oxygen near zero in the worst samples. Water that cannot support a living fish.
All the runoff that comes into the Kissimmee Valley and eventually into Lake Okeechobee creates a lot of that pollution.
Water that suffocates anything that swims into it within minutes. Bacterial counts indicating organic matter decomposing on a scale that would fuel algal blooms for months. Tannins, the same compounds that color tea, dumped in concentrations dark enough to read from space. Then the lab results came back. The phosphorus signature was not new fertilizer running off this season's fields. It was old, decades old. The legacy mud at the bottom of Lake Okeechobee, 70 years of accumulated farm runoff buried in the sediment, had been stirred up by the drawdown and was now flowing toward both coasts. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection issues health advisories along the Treasure Coast and the Lee County coast within days. Do not swim, do not fish, stay out of the water. Those advisories are still in effect. If you are the kind of person who wants the real story behind the slow-moving disasters most people never hear about until it is too late, subscribe and turn on notifications. The wall that trapped a poison. To understand what came out of the lake, you have to understand why the lake has a wall around it. September 16th, 1928. A massive hurricane makes landfall near Palm Beach and crosses directly over Lake Okeechobee. The lake is shallow, only 9 feet deep on average, and ringed by farmland worked by black migrant laborers harvesting beans, sugar cane, and winter vegetables in the rich muck soil. There is no containment system, just low natural banks. The wind shoves the lake against the southern shore. The banks collapse. A wall of water sweeps across the farmland. The official death toll was 2,500. The actual number was almost certainly higher, possibly over 3,000. Most of the victims were black, agricultural workers whose deaths were never formally recorded. Mass graves were dug, bodies were burned. At the time, it was the second deadliest natural disaster in American history. The federal government's response was a wall, a 143-mile earthen levee called the Herbert Hoover Dike, ringing the entire lake, completed in stages over the following decades. By the 1960s, the lake was sealed. Water could no longer escape over the natural banks. It could only leave through gates the Army Corps controlled. The lake that killed thousands was now under human control, or so everyone believed. Containment created a different problem. The lake became a sink. Before the dike, water flowed naturally south through hundreds of miles of marshland that filtered it on the way to Florida Bay. The dike cut that off. The land between the lake and the surviving Everglades was drained and turned into the Everglades agricultural area. Hundreds of thousands of acres of sugarcane and vegetables, an industry worth billions, fed by enormous quantities of phosphorus fertilizer. The runoff had nowhere else to go. It flowed back into Lake Okeechobee, settled into the muck, and stayed there, year after year, decade after decade.
To start growing and take advantage of the nutrients that are now released from the dying cells or dead cells, or no longer have that competition.
By the 1990s, scientists were warning that the lake bottom held one of the highest concentrations of legacy phosphorus ever measured in a natural water body. A buried reservoir of poison, accumulated over 70 years, locked into the sediment. It would stay locked as long as nobody disturbed the bottom. In December 2024, the Army Corps disturbed the bottom. Pulling that much water through the gates creates turbulence. Currents form. Sediment that has been undisturbed for years gets pulled up into the water column. The management models predicted minor cloudiness. What actually happened was a full mobilization of the legacy mud. Clouds of 70-year-old farm runoff lifting off the lake floor and pouring into the canals heading for both oceans. The organic matter in that mud started decomposing the moment it hit moving water. Decomposition burns oxygen. By the time the plume reached the coast, the water was functionally dead. That is what the analyst at NOAA was looking at on the satellite feed. Two coasts dying at once. On the Treasure Coast, the St. Lucie River turned the color of dark chocolate. The Indian River Lagoon, one of the most biodiverse estuaries in North America, home to over 4,000 species of plants and animals, caught the plume head-on. The seagrass beds are the foundation of that ecosystem. They are also the only thing keeping the lagoon's manatees alive. Manatees do not eat fish. They graze on seagrass, hundreds of pounds of it per animal per week. When the December plume hit the lagoon, the sediment-laden water blocked sunlight from reaching the grass. Photosynthesis stopped. The grass started dying. This was not the first time. Over 1,100 manatees died in Florida in 2021 alone, most from starvation after a previous round of seagrass die-offs. Wildlife rescuers in the lagoon region had spent the years since pulling emaciated animals out of the water. Visible rib cages, sunken flanks, hides loose around shrunken bodies. The recovery had been slow and fragile, and visible only to people who had been watching it day by day. One researcher quoted in a regional outlet described the December event as starting from zero again, with no time to rebuild before the next release. On the Gulf side, the Caloosahatchee River carried the same payload west. The water flowing into San Carlos Bay and around Sanibel and Captiva Islands was visibly discolored within a week. Red tide had been hovering at low levels along the coast. The organism Karenia brevis, which produces neurotoxins that kill marine life and make the air burn to breathe. The phosphorus pulse from Okeechobee was exactly the fuel it needed. The bloom went vertical. Within weeks, red tide concentrations spiked along the Lee County coast.
We need to stop the pollution, and we need to manage the lake more like a Lake Okeechobee.
Dead fish washed up on beaches in numbers crews could not keep up with. Tourists on Sanibel reported standing on the sand for 10 minutes before their throats started closing. Hotel guests reported coughing fits that did not stop until they drove inland. Restaurant owners watched local seafood suppliers go quiet. The boats were not going out. For context, the 2018 red tide event caused an estimated $184 million in losses in Lee County alone. The 2016 algal bloom on the Treasure Coast was on the same scale. The December 2024 event hit both coasts simultaneously with stronger fuel. Real estate agents along both coasts started watching waterfront values wobble. The full economic toll is still being counted. There is no fix. The question everyone is asking now is the obvious one. Can this be cleaned up? No. The phosphorus that accumulated in the lake bottom over 70 years cannot be extracted. There is no technology that pulls legacy nutrients out of lake bottom muck at this scale. The contamination is permanent. The only options left are management strategies. Keep the lake stable. Avoid drawdowns that disturb the sediment. Accept that certain operations are now too dangerous to perform. Every one of those options conflicts with everything else. The Herbert Hoover Dike is aging. Sections of the 143-mile levee are at risk during major storms. When lake levels rise, the dike is stressed, and the Army Corps has no choice but to release water, which disturbs the sediment, which mobilizes the phosphorus, which sends black water to the coasts. The federal restoration plan that was supposed to fix this is more than 2 decades behind schedule, and the key reservoirs are still unbuilt. Climate change is making this worse. Wet seasons are wetter. Hurricanes are more intense. The frequency of high water events at Okeechobee is increasing, and 8 million people still depend on this lake for drinking water. Read that again. The same body of water that just sent black, oxygen-depleted plumes to 2 coastlines is the source utility crews pull from to fill the taps in homes from Boca Raton to Naples. Treatment plants can handle the routine version of that water. Whether they can handle the legacy mud version every time the dike forces another release is a question the people running those plants are now asking quietly and not loudly. The lake is connected to both oceans through man-made canals. The legacy phosphorus is still on the bottom. The next time the dike is stressed, the Corps will open the gates again. The same dynamics will play out. Turbulence will lift the sediment. Black water will flow toward the coasts. The only variable is how severe each event will be. The wall we built around it after the 1928 hurricane was supposed to make the lake safe. It made the lake a trap instead. Everything that flowed in stayed in. In December 2024, we disturbed the sediment, and 70 years of accumulated damage came out at once, compressed into a single event, spread across 2 coastlines, visible from space. There is no solution. There is only management, and management just fails spectacularly. Subscribe so the next one does not catch you off guard. And if you want to see what is hiding at the bottom of another American lake that is older and worse, watch this next. If a routine drawdown released 70 years of buried poison into both oceans at once, what happens the next time the dike is stressed and the Corps has no choice but to open the gates again?